Hi, my name is Dana Carney. I'm a licensed social worker and the social services coordinator at POTS. My job here at POTS is basically three-pronged. Probably the thing I'm most known for is assisting adults with serious mental illness to access supportive housing. Prior to the pandemic, this process would take anywhere from 3 months to a year, which included the initial assessment, the application. Once a person was approved for supportive housing, sending the packet out, getting them interviews, and then placing them in housing. As you know, in mid-March, when everything kind of came to a grinding halt, so did the supportive housing providers. They suspended all interviews and all placements, and that continued up until the end of May, pretty much. But I was working with one gentleman, a 30-year-old man named Paul. Just to give you a little background, Paul was diagnosed with serious schizophrenia as a teenager. He was living with his mom in an apartment. When he was in his early 20s, his mother passed away unexpectedly, and Paul was left alone and without sufficient funds to pay the rent. So Paul lost the apartment. He had nowhere to go. He was fearful of going into the shelters. So Paul ended up living in the stairwell of the building where he had grown up, and he's been there for 8 years, sleeping in a stairwell at night. Being accepted by a lot of his neighbors, but also being harassed and bullied by some young men in his building. So last fall, a family friend of Paul's brought him to POTS, where I helped him to apply for supportive housing. And he was shown an apartment, a studio apartment, around the end of February 2020. After the pandemic hit, we thought, there's no way he's going to get placed anytime soon. But seeing Paul in my mind sleeping in a stairwell during a pandemic just gnawed at me. And I started reaching out to the housing provider that had shown him the apartment, because I knew the apartment was available. It was just a matter of them being willing to place him during a pandemic. It took about 6 weeks of almost every other day emailing them, phoning them, going up the chain of command, until finally around the end of April, they called and told me, if Paul can get a letter of good health from his doctor, we will place him in the apartment, even though we're not really doing this for anyone else. And sure enough, Paul was able to get the letter, and he was placed the first week of May. A couple of weeks after that, his friend sent me some pictures of Paul in his new apartment, his own studio, Paul doing his artwork, cooking a meal, relaxing on his bed. And so that was one of the more positive stories that came out of the pandemic. And I think it is getting better. We are starting to get more people placed, but that was right in the midst of all the craziness, and it kind of kept me going for quite a while. Another aspect of my job is I have a caseload of between 30 and 35 adults, mostly an older demographic, between 50 and 80, that have been coming to POTS for a period of time, for everything from case management to supportive counseling. Whatever comes up, I try to assist them with. And a large part of working with that population during the pandemic is just being a source of support and information. Initially, I called everybody on my caseload. We talked about what was happening, what safety precautions they would need to take, how they would get food, either delivered to them or in some other way, how they would continue to meet with their doctor, either via telephone or online. So it was a lot of just kind of calming people's fears and concerns. Since then, there's been ongoing contact. You know, some folks say, oh, you don't need to call me every week or every other week. I'm doing fine. And to them, I say, let me know when you need something. And then there are others who appreciate being called every week. They just like to talk. Some tell me how bored they are. We try to talk about, you know, interesting things they can do or watch on TV. And people have been very appreciative of the fact that POTS continues to be here for them, even though we can't be with them in a physical sense. The third aspect of my job is to supervise interns. Every year we get 1 or 2 social work interns from Lehman College, and in March, when everything shut down, I had 2 interns that still had 6 weeks of their internship. So we kind of had to adapt and figure out a way for them to contact their clients, finish up the applications they were working on, bring their relationships with clients to closure, do our supervisions via Zoom, and they were able to get their hours and graduate on time. So as you might imagine, we still have a lot of challenges going forward with all 3 of these areas. POTS, I think, has done an amazing job of redirecting and adapting our services. We still have a lot of work to do, and we're just trying to take it day by day. So that's pretty much it for me. I will say there have been hardships during this time, but there have also, you know, been some benefits, probably the best of which is that many of my clients have learned how to be their own advocate because they've had to be. And with coaching, with support, you know, with ongoing contact, people are learning how to manage during this time. And I think that's great.